This is the Officer Tatum Show.
All right, welcome back to the Officer Tatum Show. I am your guest host, Carl Jackson, sitting in for the Officer Tatum. The number to call in, 844-900-7243, 844-900-7243. Man, there's so much to get to, but I have a guest joining me, none other than R.C. Williams with SHERLOCexposes.com. You spell that without the K. SHERLOC, welcome to the Officer Tatum Show. Did I say SHERLOC or did I say RC? Did I say SHERLOC? Welcome to the Officer Tatum Show. Did I just say that?
SHERLOC, and that's okay. I'll take both, Carl. I love you, man. Thank you for having me on.
All right, RC. I apologize. RC Williams of SHERLOCexposes.com. And when I have questions about, ESG, all this kind of craziness, listen, R.C. Williams at SHERLOCexposes.com, a great place to go to. You want to learn about cryptocurrency, gold. You want to learn about what the left is trying to do to control you with your money, CBDC, all this kind of stuff. SHERLOCexposes.com, spell it without the K. All right, so, R.C., there are a couple of things that I do want to talk to you about. But before I do, this actually broke. So I want to make sure that I share this with the people. It apparently, and feel free to opine on this if you'd like to, RC, but Comer to subpoena the Biden family members, and I'm going to get into some Biden corruption numbers after we get off the line with RC Williams here. But House Oversight Committee Chairman James Comer on Thursday said that his committee would eventually issue subpoenas to the members of the Biden family and potentially President Joe Biden himself. And he goes on to say, and I quote, apparently he was on Fox Business, "This is always going to end with the Bidens coming in front of the committee. We're going to subpoena the family." He said this again on Fox Business. "We know that this is going to end up in court when we subpoena the Bidens. So we're putting together a case. And I think we've done that very well. We've shown the bank records, quote unquote. If I had subpoenaed Joe and Hunter Biden the first day I became chairman of the committee, it would have been tied up in court and the judge would have eventually thrown it out. We have put together a case that I think would stand up in any court of law in America." So great for Comer. This cannot be good news for the Bidens, but I do suspect that the Republican Party needs to get on with this stuff because one thing, I tell you what, Americans are hurting. They're hurting financially. And I'm afraid that some of this stuff will kind of get lost in the sauce, so to speak, as big as the story is RC. But I do want to get your take on the Biden crime family real quick, and then I want to move on to some economic things.
Yeah, Carl. So, it's the good news, bad news situation, right? The good news is it appears that Republicans in Congress have finally gotten their stuff together enough to actually move on this. The evidence is overwhelming. Here's the concern. It's what you just said. There's so many other things going on, and there's so many different winding roads within the Biden crime family that you don't want it to get lost in the sauce. What I would caution, if that was me providing advice, is that hyper-focus on the biggest fish in that pond and pound that narrative home so the American people clearly understand that getting that situation dealt with is going to have a direct impact on the day-to-day life of Americans. If they get that part right, if Comer gets that part right, then I think we've got to win. But if they just open the net and let anything in, it's going to be exactly what you said. It's going to get lost in the sauce. People are going to move on to something else. And before you know it, somebody's going to skate out on a technicality.
Yeah, it's kind of my fear. We'll see. We will see what happens with that. All right, so let's go. First off, SBF. Give us the latest on Sam Bankman-Fried. There was a charge that was dropped on Sam Bankman-Fried. It had to do with campaign finance charge. That charge was essentially reinstated, if you will. What's the latest on that, RC?
Yeah, so our favorite topic, Carl, we actually, the last time I was on, I think we spent the better part of an hour talking about the banking system and Sam Bankman-Fried. So here's the deal. A bunch of charges were thrown at Sam Bankman-Fried, and the one on political donations or political grifting was actually thrown out due to the extradition deal that he had coming from the Bahamas. That jurisdiction allows for a fair amount of protection for people who were accused of a crime. So initially it got dropped. As you said, now the DOJ is saying that they're going to, quote unquote, reinstate, but the devil is in the details. And I caution people to watch this closely, because what they actually said when they made this statement is that the Justice Department is going to consider the evidence as part of a wire fraud charge. Now, Carl, on the surface, you say, okay, look, that looks like a home run. I think we're fine here. It's still going to be part of it. You have to be careful in instances like this, because now the defense in this case is basically going to paint a picture to a jury to say the government doesn't know whether they're coming or going. And there are associations, in particular with Merrick Garland, that are really strange. So Merrick Garland, who is the current attorney general, is still extracting his pound of flesh from the American people for not getting his hearing for the Supreme Court at the end of the Obama administration. If you take it in looking at it from that scope, don't think just because the Justice Department said they're going to reinstate this, that it's, one, going to have a material impact, or B, ever come up in court if they're ultimately trying to get a conviction on something else. Don't think that this won't conveniently get thrown out, baby in the bathwater, because of who it would implement in the case.
Yeah. You know what? And honestly, it's part of the reason why I wanted you on, RC, because the truth of the matter is American people are hurting, but the Biden family continues to get enriched, and people like SBF that have helped the Democrat Party. Frankly, I will not be surprised if more charges eventually are dropped on for whatever reason. But this guy is too close to the Democrat Party. I just wonder. $40
million, Carl. $40 million.
That was in 2022 alone, was it not? Was that 2022 alone?
Yes, $40 million to Democrats and to Republicans. I ask the American people to think about this logically. Would members in Congress who took that money put themselves in a position where they could be prosecuted? The answer to that question is no, and they will do whatever it takes to give the perception that something's going to happen without it actually happening. And that's what's frustrated us the whole time, Carl. We've been on with you long enough, and I was looking at some tape that we did on your podcast back in November, and we said this exact thing. Don't be surprised if scam Bankman-Fried walks away from a lot of this. And here we are.
All right. Now, the reason, another reason I want to look at what these elites get away with, and then what the American people are dealing with. A hat tip for Gatman. Thank you. That's from CNN. Americans are pulling money out of their 401k plans at an alarming rate. More Americans are tapping their 401k accounts because of financial distress, according to Bank of America data that was released on Tuesday. The number of people who made a hardship withdrawal during the second quarter surged from the first 3 months of the year to 15,950. That's an increase of 36%, RC, from the second quarter of 2022. According to B of A, analysis of clients' employee benefit programs, which are comprised of more than 4 million plan participants. So it's a pretty rough go for the average everyday American that all of a sudden they have to be concerned about their retirement when this guy is touting Bidenomics as if it's doing something great for the American people. So these people in Washington, D.C. are getting enriched here, RC, but then you got the average everyday American that now has to be concerned about their retirement.
Masters of the griftiverse, Carl. Like the master level grift knows no boundaries. And we posed the question. We ran this story on Sherlock Exposes the other day, and we posed the question, what part of the economy is good narrative is this? CNN or Biden administration or Bidenomics? You say things are so good. Oh, everything's great. Stock market's up, this, that, and all the other. Yet just underneath that facade, people are trying to decide, do I fill the car with gas so I can get to work? Right. Do I go and overpay for food because my representative leadership has no idea how to manage the government's affairs? Or do I contribute to my 401k? Carl, if you're an average American in that situation, you're actually going to pick option D. I'm going to raid my retirement because I got to live right now and I got to feed my family right now. I'll figure it out later. And we know how this works. things get so crazy in a polycrisis, which is basically a series of crises designed to keep you anxious and frustrated and scared, that never comes. And then you're stuck.
R.C. Williams, listen, stick with me. I got a couple more questions that I want to ask you after the break. We're speaking to R.C. Williams of Sherlock Exposes without.com. All right, welcome back to the Officer Tatum Show. The number to call in, 844-900-7243. I have my guest, R.C. Williams of Sherlock Exposes without.com, SherlockExposes.com. All right, so before the break, we were talking about more Americans are pulling money out of the 401k plan. Let me just read a couple of things from this column from CNN. It's a pretty troubling development if more people are resorting to making hardship withdrawals. Matt Schultz, chief credit analyst at LendingTree, told CNN, you understand why people do that in the heat of the moment, but the opportunity costs on that are really, really high over time, he says. Bank of America's latest participant pulse report also found that a greater percentage of participants borrowed from their workplace plans from the first quarter, and average contributions trailed off as well, so less people putting in to savings. RC. The data from our reports, this is according to Bank of America, the head of retirement, Lorna Sabia. The data from our report tells two stories, one of balanced growth, optimism from younger employees and maintaining contributions, contrasted with a trend of increased plan withdrawals. This year, more employees are understandably prioritizing short-term expenses over long-term saving, and they have no choice. Plus, RC, we just surpassed $1 trillion in credit card expenditures. The American consumer has. So we are spending money like crazy. Let me tell you why this concerns me, and you already know where I'm going, RC. I am concerned about a central bank digital currency. I am concerned about a centralized dollar where things get so bad, government says, hey, we got an idea. That's what I'm concerned about, RC.
Carl, and you should be. So before we jump into that, I want to go back real quick to Jim Sabia's quote there, because I want people to be very clear in understanding what she's saying to you, because she's trying to make it sound nice, but it's really nefarious. So she's saying that there's this balanced growth from younger employees maintaining their contributions. What she's not telling you is those younger employees are going to start feeling the squeeze too. So you have someone who is less financially disciplined that's going to make more rash decisions. So they're going to start pulling their money out when they run out of runway, or when they decide to buy a house, or when they have a kid, or when they buy a new car. These things are inherently dangerous, Carl, and that's why we made the comment is what part of the economy is great is this, combined with the $1 trillion in credit card debt.
Right.
And Carl, credit card companies and banks, if you go through their earnings calls, they're telling you these things in their documents. They are preparing for a tsunami of defaults. They're just baking it in to their future projections, saying, look, people aren't going to be able to pay their bills. So where does this ultimately lead, right? We've talked about this in the past. In March, it really came to light with the failure of Silicon Valley Bank and the others. And at that time, we said, you're in for a setup here. The banking system has basically been nationalized and is so weak, it's like The Walking Dead. You're just waiting for the next bank to get sick enough to die and reanimate as something even worse, right? But the banks are going to start to fall off. So what does this do? It allows the government to say, look, the economy is unstable, or the banking system is unstable. We need to step in and fix it for you. Now, right now, Carl, most people would say, well, the government can't do anything right in the U.S. anyway. Why would we let them do that? But here's what the government did to you. They snuck one in on you over the last 2 months with the FedNow program. The FedNow program accelerates transactions. So if Carl wrote us a check for services for $20,000, we put it in the bank, it's going to be in there for 2 weeks before we ever see the money, because that's what banks do. With FedNow, the government says, we'll make that instant so you don't have to wait for your money anymore. Suddenly, the U.S. government is a hero. Then they tell you the economic system and the banking system are in terrible shape, and they need to step in, quote unquote, for your safety. Friends, that is the first step to a central bank digital currency. Once they get you there and there are no more exits, we've talked about this, Carl. We've talked about it on the show. Once they close all the exits, there's no way for you to get out. So you've got to be paying attention to these small moves they're making because they're setting you up. And the CBDC is dangerous because then it's whenever they feel like you need to do or not do something, they just turn on and off your money.
And that's where we're going. Carol Roth, there was an article that Forgotten Man got for me from Carol Roth. I mean, she is saying we are headed down that path. A lot of Americans don't get it, but that is exactly where we are headed. Opine on this, RC. Moody's downgrades credit ratings of 10 mid-size banks. I'm sure you're up on that. Tell us about that.
Yeah, so this kind of goes back to the conversation we had in March, Carl, on this show, where we talked about where banks are at and how the government basically stepped in and guaranteed all deposits to stop a full-on economic collapse. Now, obviously, some time has passed, but what hasn't passed is that viral infection. We gave the analogy of the Walking Dead TV show. The secret to that show and to that book is that everyone already has the virus, and it takes place, it gets bad when you start to die. Right? And then you come back and you eat other things. So in essence, what's happening now is you're seeing more of the shakeout when we told people this isn't over. This is just beginning. Look for more names that you recognize to get into trouble and ultimately fail. This is another step in that direction. And Moody's is basically the credit ratings bureau for banks, investments, and things like that. When Moody's speaks, it's like a currency in and of itself. So what they're telling you is that small to mid-sized banks, particularly those banks who have huge exposure in commercial real estate, are basically dead. Okay? And what they're also telling you is that some of the larger banks on this list, U.S. Bank, Bank of New York, State Street, Truist, which we had on our death list for a long while, along with PNC, are also likely in trouble. It just hasn't filtered down yet. So ultimately, Carl, what's going to happen is you're going to be in a situation where killing off small to mid-sized banks, anything that has a level of independence to it, is crucial to the plan of a central bank digital currency. Because what they really need to do is get you down to 5 or 6 options that are all big banks that already have systems like FedNow in place, so that once they get you in and there's nowhere else to go, you have to conform or you have to live off the system.
This is what I mean, RC. I mean, we only have a minute left. I'm telling you, Republicans are always forever playing checkers. I don't even hear any of them discussing this stuff right now. It drives me insane. Let me just read these numbers. I'll let you sign off. Medical care. So I want you guys in the listening audience to understand, because I'm getting ready to get to some more biting crime, family corruption. Medical care is up 4.3%. Apparel up 12.8%. Wages up 14.8%. Shelter up 17%. Food at home 20%. Food away from home 20.5%. Only got about 15 or 10 seconds. What do you have to say to close out here, RC?
Oh, my goodness. So these numbers where they strip out things for the consumer price index are ridiculous. Things are upside down, Carl. They're absolutely upside down. People can learn more at SHERLOCexposes.com, including the alternative that we found to Zoom called TruthHub. Everything is linked there, including our Q2 State of the Economy report.
All right. Thank you. RC Williams, SHERLOCexposes.com. Check them out.